The diplomatic reception. The reception hall on Valoris Prime shimmered with architecture that seemed grown rather than built, and Ambassador Daniel Rivera had never felt more conspicuously human in his entire 34 years of existence. Crystalline spires rose toward a ceiling that pulsed with soft bioluminescence, while the Valorian nobles moved through the space like living works of art, and their purple skin catching the strange light in ways that made them appear almost ethereal. Daniel was nursing something the translation matrix called ceremonial nectar, but which tasted like honey mixed with electricity when she appeared beside him without warning. Princess Zephyra was tall, and her deep purple skin marked with intricate silver patterns that supposedly indicated royal blood, and her hair fell in waves of dark violet nearly to her waist, and her eyes were the color of distant galaxies, deep indigo, flecked with points of light that seemed to shift when she moved. Ambassador Rivera, her voice carried musical undertones that made human speech sound rough by comparison. I am Princess Zephyra.
The diplomatic reception. The reception hall on Valoris Prime shimmered with architecture that seemed grown rather than built, and Ambassador Daniel Rivera had never felt more conspicuously human in his entire 34 years of existence. Crystalline spires rose toward a ceiling that pulsed with soft bioluminescence, while the Valorian nobles moved through the space like living works of art, and their purple skin catching the strange light in ways that made them appear almost ethereal. Daniel was nursing something the translation matrix called ceremonial nectar, but which tasted like honey mixed with electricity when she appeared beside him without warning. Princess Zephyra was tall, and her deep purple skin marked with intricate silver patterns that supposedly indicated royal blood, and her hair fell in waves of dark violet nearly to her waist, and her eyes were the color of distant galaxies, deep indigo flecked with points of light that seemed to shift when she moved. Ambassador Rivera, her voice carried musical undertones that made human speech sound rough by comparison. I am Princess Zephyra, and I have been designated as primary human specialist for our diplomatic relations. Your Highness, Daniel managed what he hoped was an appropriate gesture of respect. It is an honor to meet you. I have been extensively studying human biology in preparation for this alliance, she continued with a directness that immediately made Daniel nervous. There are aspects of your species' bonding behavior that our xenobiologists find deeply perplexing. Daniel took a longer drink of his ceremonial nectar than was probably diplomatic. What aspects specifically? Your pair bonding frequency. She said it with the same clinical tone someone might use discussing atmospheric composition. Valorian biological literature suggests humans engage in intimate bonding behavior far more frequently than necessary for actual reproduction. And some estimates suggest humans bond for pleasure rather than purely procreative purposes, which seems profoundly inefficient. Around them, hundreds of elegant Valorian nobles continued their sophisticated conversations about trade agreements and cultural exchanges, completely unaware that the princess had just asked the human ambassador about mating habits. That is a very direct question, Daniel managed. Valorians value direct inquiry over elaborate social pretense, and is the information incorrect? No, it is broadly accurate, and humans do engage in intimate behavior more frequently than strictly necessary for reproduction. It serves social bonding and emotional connection purposes. Zephyra's galaxy-flecked eyes narrowed with intense scientific curiosity. How frequently exactly? because our data sources are wildly inconsistent, and some human texts suggest weekly intervals, while others imply daily engagement. The range seems impossibly broad. Daniel desperately wished he could disappear through the floor because he was a trained diplomat who had handled complex negotiations and mediated conflicts. But apparently, discussing human intimacy with a purple-skinned alien princess was where his professional composure completely failed. That is an extremely personal question, Your Highness. Yes, which is precisely why I am asking you directly. She tilted her head, genuinely confused by his visible discomfort. Is this information considered culturally private among humans? Among humans, intimate behavior is considered deeply private, and we do not typically discuss personal details, especially not with people we have just met. Then we will relocate to a genuinely private setting. Before Daniel could protest, she was already moving through the crowd with royal authority, and the other Valorians parted automatically, and Daniel found himself being efficiently guided toward a side corridor. Wondering how a diplomatic reception had transformed into something far more complicated.
The private inquiry. They ended up in what appeared to be a private study with walls lined with crystalline data storage that pulsed softly with internal light and a massive window overlooking the capital city's bioluminescent towers that painted the night in shades of purple and blue. Zafira closed the door with a soft click that sounded remarkably final. There, she turned to face him with those impossible, galaxy-flecked eyes. Completely private, and now please provide accurate information about human bonding frequency based on your personal experiential data. Daniel ran his hand through his dark hair, which was a nervous habit he had never managed to break even under intense diplomatic pressure. Your Highness, I understand Valorian culture is different, but asking someone about their personal, intimate life is considered profoundly invasive by human standards, even in private settings. But you are a diplomat. Her silver markings seemed to shimmer slightly as she spoke. Your explicit purpose is facilitating cultural understanding between our species, and how can I properly understand human behavior patterns without access to accurate, primary source data? There are academic resources and properly conducted scientific studies which contradict each other with remarkable consistency, she interrupted and moved closer. I have personally reviewed 17 different human academic texts on bonding behavior, and they range from clinical to absurdly metaphorical. And one text suggested humans mate when the mood strikes, which provides zero analytical value. Despite his profound discomfort, Daniel found himself slightly amused by her obvious frustration. Human intimacy is complicated, and it is not purely biological function, and there are emotional and psychological components that vary dramatically by individual. Then explain these components using your personal experience as reference point. Why is my specific personal experience so critically important? Something flickered across Zafira's elegant purple features, and it was an expression that seemed almost like uncertainty, which was jarring on someone projecting absolute confidence. Because you are the actual human I am currently conversing with, her voice was quieter now. Abstract academic descriptions have proven insufficient for genuine understanding, and you are my first extended contact with your species, and if I cannot understand you specifically, how can I reasonably expect to understand humanity generally? There was something vulnerable in that admission that caught Daniel completely off guard, because she was not asking as a detached scientist collecting data, but because she genuinely wanted to understand. He sighed deeply. This is going to be awkward. Awkward is acceptable, and continued ignorance is not. Daniel moved to one of the elegant chairs and sat down, while Zafira remained standing and watching him with those intense eyes that made him feel simultaneously valued and examined. For humans, he began carefully,
Intimate behavior is not scheduled or frequency-based like biological function, and it is intrinsically connected to emotional state and relationship dynamics and mutual desire. You only bond when emotionally connected to a partner? Zafira asked, and Daniel noticed she was genuinely processing this rather than just cataloging it. Most humans strongly prefer emotional connection, yes, and physical intimacy without emotional component is possible, but generally considered significantly less satisfying. Define emotional connection with sufficient precision. Daniel thought about how to put something fundamentally feeling-based into analytical terms: trust and genuine affection and caring about the other person's well-being and wanting to be close to them, not just physically, but emotionally. And for humans, intimacy is a form of communication as much as physical act. Communication? She repeated the word, like testing its weight. You communicate through bonding behavior? Physical intimacy expresses feelings that are often difficult to verbalize adequately, like vulnerability, trust, desire, and care. And all of these get communicated through physical closeness in ways words sometimes cannot capture. Zafira was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed to something softer and less clinical. Valordians do not experience this phenomenon, and our reproductive behavior is biologically pleasant, but ultimately functional, and we do not communicate emotion through physical intimacy. Then why are you so intensely interested in human behavior if it is fundamentally different from your own experience? She looked away briefly, and it was the first time she had broken that intense eye contact. Because your species fascinates me, on a level I find difficult to articulate. Her purple skin seemed to darken slightly, which Daniel was learning might indicate emotional response. Humans are so emotionally transparent and so willing to be vulnerable, and Valorians are taught rigorous emotional control from early childhood, and we value logic and efficiency and restraint above all else. But you personally do not believe vulnerability is weakness. I am increasingly uncertain what I believe, she admitted quietly. I am third in succession to the Valorian throne, with extensive duties and rigid cultural expectations, but I observe human cultural broadcasts, and I read human literature, and I see emotional depth that my species systematically does not permit ourselves to experience. They were sitting closer now, and two isolated beings discovering unexpected common ground. You asked about my experience earlier, Daniel said carefully. Can I ask about yours? Yes, but I must warn you, Ambassador, that my answer may be profoundly unsatisfactory compared to what you have described.
The confession. Zafira settled into the chair across from him, and the proximity made Daniel acutely aware of the subtle luminescence emanating from her silver markings and the way her purple skin seemed to shift between deeper and lighter shades depending on her emotional state. Valorians pair for reproduction when genetically appropriate, she began, and her voice carried a hollow quality. We engage in behavior that ensures healthy genetic diversity, but there is no emotional component resembling what you described, and it is biologically pleasant, but not emotionally meaningful beyond fulfilling biological imperatives. Have you ever wanted it to be more? Daniel asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, and Zafira's galaxy-flecked eyes widened slightly, as if no one had ever thought to ask her such a thing. I did not know there was more until I began studying human cultural materials, she admitted, and her silver markings pulsed with soft light. Your species writes extensively about something called love, and your literature describes physical intimacy as transcendent experience rather than biological function. And your music speaks of connection so profound it defies logical explanation. She paused, and her purple skin darkened noticeably. I consumed these materials initially as academic research, but I found myself returning to them repeatedly and experiencing something I could not adequately categorize. And Valorian psychological literature would classify my behavior as inefficient fixation, but I believe humans might call it longing.
Longing for what, exactly? To understand what it feels like, her voice dropped to barely above whisper, to experience connection that is not purely functional, and to know what humans mean when they speak of intimacy that communicates emotions words cannot capture. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, because he recognized that longing intimately, and he had felt it every night for the past 3 months, alone in his diplomatic quarters, surrounded by beings he could not truly understand him. "You mentioned earlier that I am isolated here," he said carefully, "but you are isolated too, are you not?" Zafira nodded slowly. "I have title and status and responsibilities, but genuine connection remains elusive even among my own species, and most individuals see Princess Zafira and the political position rather than simply Zafira as actual person. And I have colleagues and subjects and potential genetic partners, but I do not have what humans would call intimacy with anyone." That sounds profoundly lonely. I did not have adequate vocabulary for loneliness until I began studying human emotional concepts, she admitted. Valorians do not acknowledge such feelings as valid, and we are taught that desire for connection beyond functional necessity represents weakness and inefficiency. But you do not believe that. I believe I have been experiencing something my culture insists should not exist. Her eyes met his with startling intensity. And meeting you has made it considerably more acute because you speak of emotional intimacy with such clarity, and you clearly understand connection in ways I can only theorize about. The charged atmosphere between them had shifted into something neither had anticipated, and Daniel was acutely aware that she was beautiful in ways that transcended species differences and that her vulnerability was genuine and profound. "Zafira," he said, her name without title, for the first time, "what exactly are you asking me?" She was quiet for a long moment, and her purple skin shifting through shades that suggested internal conflict. "I am asking if understanding human connection is possible for someone like me." Her voice trembled slightly. "I am asking if what your species experiences could ever be accessible to a Valorian who has never known anything beyond functional biological interaction." "You want to know if you could feel what humans feel?" "I want to know if I could feel what you feel," she corrected softly, "specifically. And I recognize this may be inappropriate diplomatic inquiry, but I find I cannot maintain professional detachment when discussing this subject with you." Daniel swallowed hard because every aspect of his diplomatic training screamed warnings about complicated entanglements with alien royalty, but something deeper responded to her honesty with matching vulnerability. "I have been alone here for 3 months, surrounded by beings I cannot truly connect with. And maintaining professional composure while managing isolation, I try not to think about directly. And when you ask about human intimacy, you are asking about something I desperately miss. Then we are both isolated beings longing for connection we cannot access," Zafira said quietly. "It appears so." She moved closer, and her galaxy eyes searching his face with intensity that made his breath catch. "Would be diplomatically catastrophic if I admitted I find myself wanting to understand human connection through direct experience rather than continued academic study?" Daniel's heart was pounding against his ribs. "That depends entirely on what you mean by direct experience." "I mean," she paused, and her silver markings pulsing rapidly, "I want you to show me what human intimacy actually feels like, Ambassador Rivera, and I want to understand with my body what my mind cannot adequately comprehend through research alone."
At the experiment, Daniel's breath caught as Zafira's words settled between them, and every professional instinct warned him about diplomatic complications, but her vulnerability had shattered his careful restraint. "You understand this would change everything," he said quietly. "I am counting on it," she whispered. She reached toward him tentatively, and her purple fingers trembling slightly as they brushed his jaw, and her eyes widened at the contact. "Your skin is so warm," she breathed. "Valorians run considerably cooler, and I did not anticipate how pleasant human temperature would feel." Daniel caught her hand gently and pressed his lips to her palm, and she gasped softly at the sensation. "That is what humans call a kiss," he explained. "We use them to express affection. Show me more." He stood slowly and drew her closer, and her tall frame fitting against his in ways that felt surprisingly natural, despite their biological differences. And when his lips finally met hers, she made a sound that was half surprise and half wonder. I feel, she struggled for words, I feel something spreading through my chest that I cannot categorize, and it is not purely physical sensation. That might be the beginning of emotional connection. It is overwhelming. Her galaxy eyes were luminous. How do humans function experiencing such intensity regularly? We learn to treasure it rather than fear it. His hands traced along her silver markings and discovered they were slightly raised against her purple skin and extraordinarily sensitive. And she shivered at his touch. No one has ever touched me with such deliberate gentleness, she admitted breathlessly. Valorian encounters are efficient rather than exploratory. Human intimacy is about discovery, Daniel murmured against her neck. About learning what brings your partner pleasure and communicating care through touch. They moved toward the elegant seating area, and Zafira pulled him down beside her, and her earlier clinical curiosity had transformed into genuine, emotional engagement, and her purple skin flushed darker wherever his hands traveled. I understand now, she gasped as he showed her exactly what human connection meant. This is not biological function at all. This is conversation without words. Yes, he breathed against her luminous skin. This is how humans say things too important for language. The understanding. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Zafira's purple skin still flushed, and her silver markings pulsing with soft, satisfied light as she processed everything she had experienced. I comprehend now why human literature speaks of intimacy as transcendent, she said quietly, and her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. Academic texts could never have conveyed this adequately. It required direct experiential understanding. And what did you understand? That vulnerability is not weakness. She turned to face him, and her galaxy eyes shimmering. That allowing someone access to your emotional truth creates connection far more profound than any functional biological interaction, and that I have been starving for something my culture taught me should not exist. Daniel brushed violet hair from her face gently. What happens now? Now I face choice, she admitted, between rigid cultural expectations that demand emotional restraint and this new understanding of genuine connection that makes returning to isolation seem unbearable. The diplomatic implications are considerable, she smiled slightly. Princess Zafira engaging in emotional bonding with human ambassador would create significant political complexity. Do you regret it? I regret nothing, her voice was firm. For the first time, I understand what humans mean when they speak of feeling truly known by another being, and I refuse to categorize that understanding as mistake, regardless of political consequences. She sat up slowly, her expression contemplative. Perhaps this is precisely what our species' diplomatic relationship requires, not merely trade agreements and territorial negotiations, but genuine understanding between individuals, a bridge built on vulnerability and trust rather than formal protocol. You want to continue this. I want to explore what we began, she corrected softly. I want to learn everything about human emotional connection, and I want to understand love as humans understand it, and I want you to teach me. Daniel pulled her back down beside him. That could take considerable time. Fortunately, diplomatic assignments typically last years rather than months, and I am an exceptionally dedicated student when subject matter genuinely interests me, and human intimacy genuinely interests you. Human intimacy with you specifically. She pressed her purple lips to his gently. You showed me something tonight that changed my fundamental understanding of what connection between beings can mean, and I am not prepared to return to functional isolation after experiencing genuine, emotional intimacy. Outside the window, the bioluminescent towers of the Valorian capital painted the night in shades of purple and blue, and two beings from radically different worlds had discovered something neither species had anticipated. That sometimes, understanding requires more than academic study, that vulnerability creates bridges logic cannot build, and that connection transcends biological differences when two lonely hearts finally find each other across the vast distances between stars.